It was a cold December night when a police cruiser's lights flashed behind General Robert Thompson's unmarked government vehicle on Highway 95. What happened in the next 7 minutes would shake the foundations of both the military and law enforcement communities across America. The decorated four-star general, with his hands gripping the steering wheel, made a decision that would end his 35-year military career. He reached for his phone and hit record. "Sir, turn off your vehicle and step out immediately." The young officer's voice cracked with an unusual mix of authority and nervousness. The general's dashboard camera captured every word, every movement, and most importantly, every lie that would soon be exposed to millions. Little did either man know that this routine traffic stop would uncover one of the biggest scandals in recent military history. As General Thompson stepped out of his car, the weight of classified documents in his briefcase felt heavier than ever. He wasn't supposed to be on this road. He wasn't supposed to be alone. And he certainly wasn't supposed to get caught. The officer's body camera recorded what appeared to be a simple traffic violation. But when those videos would eventually sync and play side by side in a Pentagon briefing room 3 days later, the footage would reveal something that would make the Joint Chiefs of Staff sit in stunned silence. A passing truck driver, seeing the flashing lights, decided to slow down and record the interaction on his phone, inadvertently capturing the one crucial detail both official cameras missed. That footage would later be viewed over 50 million times online, sparking nationwide protests and leading to congressional hearings. What started as a routine traffic stop on a quiet stretch of highway was about to expose decades of covered-up corruption, challenge the very foundations of military-police relations, and test the limits of loyalty and honor in both institutions. Neither the general nor the young officer could have predicted that their brief encounter would ultimately save thousands of lives and change department policies across the nation. But first, the truth would need to come out. And the truth, as both men would soon learn, was far more complicated than either of them imagined. In the tight-knit military community of Fort Richardson, General Robert Thompson was known as a man who lived by the book. His modest office, decorated with faded photographs of desert operations and humanitarian missions, told the story of a leader who had earned every star on his shoulder through dedicated service. Born into a working-class family in a small Midwest town, Thompson had worked his way up through the ranks over 3.5 decades. His colleagues often spoke about how he still carried his father's worn-out pocket watch, a reminder of his humble beginnings as a factory worker's son. Despite reaching the military's highest echelons, he continued driving his 10-year-old Ford and living in standard military housing, earning him the nickname the People's General. What set Thompson apart wasn't just his combat experience or strategic brilliance, it was his unwavering commitment to his troops' welfare. He had established groundbreaking PTSD support programs and fought tirelessly to improve veterans' healthcare benefits. His wife, Linda, ran a volunteer organization supporting military families, making them a respected power couple in the armed forces community. However, in the months leading up to that fateful traffic stop, subtle changes had begun to appear in the general's behavior. His secretary noticed increased late-night office hours. Security logs showed unusual weekend visits to restricted areas. Fellow officers reported him being distracted during important briefings. Perhaps most telling was his sudden cancellation of the annual Thompson family Christmas gathering, a tradition he hadn't missed in 20 years. The base's cybersecurity team had detected irregular access patterns to classified databases from his terminal, but given his spotless record and high clearance level, these red flags were quietly dismissed. His recent requests for detailed reports on military supply chains and contractor agreements raised eyebrows, but no one dared question a four-star general's motives. What puzzled his closest advisors was his growing interest in a seemingly mundane military contractor case from 15 years ago. He had requested old files, conducted private interviews with retired personnel, and made numerous calls to obscure military archives. The case involved a small transportation company that had gone bankrupt after losing its military contracts, hardly the type of matter that should concern a general of his stature. The week before the traffic stop, Thompson had called an unexpected meeting with the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The meeting's contents remained classified, but witnesses described him leaving the room looking troubled and determined. That same evening, he cleared his schedule for the next 3 days, something he had never done before without explanation. Those who knew him best would later say they should have seen the signs. The extra security cameras he had installed around his office, the new encrypted phone he carried, the long private conversations with his wife, all pointed to a man carrying a burden too heavy for even his decorated shoulders. But in the military, questioning a superior's actions without clear evidence was career suicide. Besides, this was General Thompson, the man who had never put a foot wrong in 35 years of service. Little did anyone know that behind his carefully maintained facade of military precision and protocol, General Thompson was preparing for the most important mission of his career, one that would either cement his legacy as a hero or destroy everything he had spent his life building. The truth he carried in his briefcase that night would do both. Officer James Parker had only been on the force for 18 months when his patrol car's headlights illuminated General Thompson's sedan that night. At 28, he had joined the police force later than most, after spending 6 years as an emergency medical technician in rural communities. His experience treating accident victims and dealing with crisis situations had earned him a reputation as one of the most level-headed officers in the department. That evening had started like any other night shift. Parker had helped an elderly couple change a flat tire, responded to a minor fender bender, and written up 2 speeding tickets. His supervisor had recently recommended him for a specialized training program, noting his exceptional ability to de-escalate tense situations and his meticulous attention to protocol. What his colleagues didn't know was that Parker carried his own burden. His father, a Vietnam veteran, had taken his own life 10 years earlier after a long battle with PTSD. The tragedy had sparked Parker's interest in both emergency services and law enforcement, driving him to help others in crisis. He kept a small photo of his father in his patrol car's visor, a reminder of why he chose this path. The events leading up to that traffic stop had been unusual from the start. Earlier that evening, Parker had received a cryptic message from dispatch about watching for vehicles matching certain descriptions on Highway 95. The message had come through his patrol car's secure channel, something typically reserved for major operations or high-risk situations. During his dinner break at the local diner, Parker had noticed 2 unmarked black SUVs parked across the street. The men inside seemed to be watching the traffic, but when Parker approached to check on them, they quickly drove away. His instincts told him something wasn't right, but he couldn't put his finger on what. 3 hours before the fateful traffic stop, Parker had pulled over another government vehicle for a routine check. The driver, a middle-aged man in a suit, had shown proper credentials, but seemed unusually nervous. In the tight-knit military community of Fort Richardson, General Robert Thompson was known as a man who lived by the book. His modest office, decorated with faded photographs of desert operations and humanitarian missions, told the story of a leader who had earned every star on his shoulder through dedicated service. Born into a working-class family in a small Midwest town, Thompson had worked his way up through the ranks over 3.5 decades. His colleagues often spoke about how he still carried his father's worn-out pocket watch, a reminder of his humble beginnings as a factory worker's son. Despite reaching the military's highest echelons, he continued driving his 10-year-old Ford and living in standard military housing, earning him the nickname the People's General. What set Thompson apart wasn't just his combat experience or strategic brilliance, it was his unwavering commitment to his troops' welfare. He had established groundbreaking PTSD support programs and fought tirelessly to improve veterans' healthcare benefits. His wife, Linda, ran a volunteer organization supporting military families, making them a respected power couple in the armed forces community. However, in the months leading up to that fateful traffic stop, subtle changes had begun to appear in the general's behavior. His secretary noticed increased late-night office hours. Security logs showed unusual weekend visits to restricted areas. Fellow officers reported him being distracted during important briefings. Perhaps most telling was his sudden cancellation of the annual Thompson family Christmas gathering, a tradition he hadn't missed in 20 years. The base's cybersecurity team had detected irregular access patterns to classified databases from his terminal, but given his spotless record and high clearance level, these red flags were quietly dismissed. His recent requests for detailed reports on military supply chains and contractor agreements raised eyebrows, but no one dared question a four-star general's motives. What puzzled his closest advisors was his growing interest in a seemingly mundane military contractor case from 15 years ago. He had requested old files, conducted private interviews with retired personnel, and made numerous calls to obscure military archives. The case involved a small transportation company that had gone bankrupt after losing its military contracts, hardly the type of matter that should concern a general of his stature. The week before the traffic stop, Thompson had called an unexpected meeting with the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The meeting's contents remained classified, but witnesses described him leaving the room looking troubled and determined. That same evening, he cleared his schedule for the next 3 days, something he had never done before without explanation. When Parker ran the plates later, the database showed no record of the vehicle, a discrepancy that troubled him enough to make a note in his log. What stood out most about that night was the unusual amount of radio chatter about surveillance positions along the highway. Parker had worked this route for months and had never heard so much coded communication. His training officer had always taught him to trust his gut, and something about this night felt orchestrated, as if he was playing a part in someone else's plan. Just before spotting General Thompson's car, Parker had noticed his radio acting up, producing static at regular intervals, something the department's technical team would later identify as signs of signal interference. He had just decided to report the issue when his radar picked up Thompson's vehicle traveling slightly above the speed limit. As he activated his lights and called in the stop, Parker couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to step into something much bigger than a routine traffic violation. His years as an EMT had taught him to recognize the moments before a situation turned critical. This felt like one of those moments. In the official report he would file the next day, Parker would write that he followed standard procedure for the traffic stop. What he wouldn't mention was the slight tremor in his hands as he approached Thompson's car, or the way his throat tightened when he saw the general's insignia. Some details, he decided, were better left to the dashboard camera to record. The Pentagon's digital forensics team would spend weeks analyzing every frame of footage from that night. What started as a routine review of dashboard and body camera recordings evolved into one of the most complex investigations in department history, as 3 different camera angles revealed a carefully orchestrated deception unfolding on Highway 95. The first revelation came from Officer Parker's body camera footage. The standard traffic stop procedure took an unexpected turn when General Thompson immediately identified himself and requested a secure line to his commanding officer. The camera caught a subtle hand signal from Thompson, a military distress code that wouldn't be recognized until much later. The dashboard camera from Parker's patrol car provided the second crucial perspective. It captured 2 unmarked vehicles that passed by during the stop, their headlights briefly illuminating a reflection in Thompson's back window, a reflection that showed someone watching from the tree line behind them. The vehicle's license plates, when freeze-framed, matched those from Parker's earlier suspicious encounter. But it was the general's own recording device, cleverly disguised as a phone, that revealed the most startling details. As he stepped out of his car, the high-definition microphone. Within hours, major news networks began running cryptic headlines: high-ranking military official under investigation, mysterious highway incident sparks federal probe. Social media exploded with snippets of the truck driver's viral video, amateur analysts dissecting every frame, spawning countless theories about what really happened that night. Linda Thompson's calm exterior cracked only once during the initial press conference. When asked about her husband's whereabouts, she simply stated, "My husband has served this country faithfully for 35 years. Trust that he continues to do so." The slight tremor in her voice spoke volumes to those who knew her well. The military wives support group she led quickly rallied around her, forming a protective circle against the growing media frenzy. At the police department, Officer Parker found himself in an unusual position. Instead of being suspended or reprimanded, he was placed on special assignment, working directly with a joint task force of military and federal investigators. His EMT background and attention to detail proved invaluable as they reconstructed the events of that night. His father's military service gave him unique insights into the subtle nuances of Thompson's behavior. The evidence processing team made a startling discovery when analyzing Thompson's vehicle. Hidden beneath the standard GPS tracker was a sophisticated counter-surveillance device, military-grade technology that wasn't supposed to exist outside of classified operations. The briefcase had vanished, but its tracking signal had gone dark somewhere near the Canadian border. Base security footage from the weeks leading up to the incident revealed a pattern of late-night meetings between Thompson and a select group of retired officers. Each visitor had entered through different gates, never leaving paper trails, their conversations held in areas known to be free of surveillance. The general had been methodically building something right under everyone's noses. What baffled investigators most was the complete lack of electronic evidence. Thompson's official emails and phone records showed nothing unusual. His financial records were spotless. Even his classified access logs appeared perfectly normal. It was as if he had orchestrated an entire operation without leaving a single digital fingerprint. The media narrative began to shift as carefully curated details leaked out. Headlines changed from "General Goes Rogue" to "Possible Whistleblower Operation Uncovered." Public opinion swung wildly between condemning Thompson as a traitor and hailing him as a hero, though no one quite knew what he had done. Behind closed doors, a select group of officials began to understand the magnitude of what Thompson had set in motion. The traffic stop hadn't been an end point, it was a crucial link in a chain of events that had been years in the making. As one senior investigator noted in a confidential brief, "We're not looking at a scandal. We're looking at someone dismantling one." The seventh day after the incident brought the first concrete break in the case. A retired sergeant major, one of Thompson's oldest friends, arrived at the FBI field office with a sealed envelope. Inside was a handwritten note from the general, its contents significant enough to prompt an emergency session of the Joint Chiefs. The game was entering its next phase, and the stakes were higher than anyone had imagined. The investigation spiraled into unexpected territory as both military and police internal affairs units dug deeper. The first breakthrough came when investigators discovered a connection between General Thompson's recent records requests and a series of military supply contracts from 15 years ago. The contracts, initially appearing routine, had been awarded to a small consortium of companies, all mysteriously dissolved within months of receiving multi-million-dollar payments. A veteran police detective, reviewing Officer Parker's dash cam footage for the 100th time, noticed something peculiar. The general's seemingly random movements during the traffic stop corresponded perfectly with the locations of traffic cameras along Highway 95. Each gesture, each step, had been precisely calculated to be captured from multiple angles, creating an unbreakable chain of video evidence. The real bombshell dropped when Linda Thompson provided investigators with access to her husband's personal safe. Inside, they found meticulously documented evidence of a massive corruption scheme involving high-ranking military officials and defense contractors. The documents revealed systematic overcharging for basic supplies, phantom shipments to overseas bases, and equipment that existed only on paper. More disturbing were the implications for soldier safety. The investigation uncovered that substandard materials had been used in critical military equipment, with quality control reports falsified to hide the defects. The scope of the scandal touched everything from body armor to vehicle maintenance, potentially putting thousands of service members at risk. Officer Parker's role in the operation became clearer as investigators pieced together the puzzle. His father's suicide, triggered by inadequate PTSD care, hadn't been just a personal tragedy. It was part of a larger pattern of systematic neglect enabled by misappropriated veterans' healthcare funds. Thompson had chosen Parker specifically, knowing his background would make him the perfect witness once the truth emerged. The sealed envelope delivered by Thompson's old friend contained more than just a note. Hidden within its lining was a microSD card containing encrypted files that provided the final links in the chain of evidence. The data showed how military contracts had been manipulated, funds diverted, and oversight committees deliberately misled. Deep background checks into the shell companies revealed a network of offshore accounts tied to several retired generals and civilian contractors. Each transaction had been carefully hidden behind layers of legitimate-looking paperwork, the deception so complete that it had fooled auditors for years. What emerged was a picture of corruption so intricate that it had become nearly invisible, hidden in plain sight within the massive military bureaucracy. Thompson hadn't just discovered the scandal, he had spent years mapping its entire structure, identifying every player, and documenting every fraudulent transaction. The investigation team realized that the traffic stop had been more than just a chance encounter, it was the linchpin in Thompson's plan to expose the truth. By ensuring multiple cameras captured every moment, he had created irrefutable proof that he had acted under duress, protecting both himself and Officer Parker while guaranteeing the evidence would reach the right people. As the sun set on the 14th day of the investigation, a senior FBI agent turned to his colleague and said, "Thompson didn't end his career that night. He sacrificed it to save countless others." The true magnitude of the general's actions was finally becoming clear, but the most shocking revelations were still to come. The public reaction to the unfolding scandal swept across the nation like a tidal wave. Veterans groups were the first to mobilize, organizing peaceful demonstrations outside military bases and contractor offices. Social media exploded with personal stories from service members who had suspected equipment issues but had been ignored or silenced when they tried to report them. At police departments nationwide, a different kind of revolution was taking place. Officer Parker's role in the incident sparked discussions about the relationship between law enforcement and military personnel. His methodical handling of the traffic stop became a case study in police academies, demonstrating how following proper procedure while trusting one's instincts could uncover much larger truths. Linda Thompson emerged as an unexpected voice of clarity amid the chaos. Her televised interview with a national news network drew record viewership as she described her husband's internal struggle, torn between his oath of loyalty and his duty to protect those under his command. Her quiet dignity and unwavering support resonated deeply with military families across the country. Military bases became divided between those who saw Thompson as a traitor to the ranks and those who hailed him as a hero. Young officers, particularly those who had served under Thompson, began coming forward with their own stories of suspicious activities they had witnessed but felt powerless to challenge. The code of silence that had protected the corrupt system for so long began to crack. The truck driver who had captured the viral video, a veteran himself, revealed in an exclusive interview that he had recognized the general's distress signals from his own military training. His decision to slow down and record the incident hadn't been random, he had sensed something significant was unfolding and knew the importance of documenting it. Congressional hearings were hastily organized as the scope of the scandal became clear. The testimony of mid-level procurement officers and supply sergeants painted a damning picture of systemic corruption. One sergeant's emotional account of losing 2 team members to equipment failure in Afghanistan brought the hearing room to stunned silence. The law enforcement community's response shifted dramatically when Officer Parker's full role came to light. His patient professionalism during the traffic stop had provided crucial documentation while protecting both himself and the general. Police unions across the country began advocating for better training in recognizing and reporting potential corruption at all levels of government. Support groups for military families organized nationwide rallies, demanding accountability and reform. Linda Thompson's organization expanded rapidly, becoming a powerful voice for transparency in military contracting and veteran care. The movement crossed political lines, uniting people behind a common cause of protecting those who serve. The most profound impact came from within the ranks themselves. Young soldiers and officers began questioning orders more carefully, particularly regarding equipment and supply issues. The phrase, "What would Thompson do?" became a quiet watchword for those faced with ethical dilemmas. The culture of blind obedience was giving way to one of responsible oversight. As the 7th week of investigations drew to a close, a senior Pentagon official privately admitted, "Thompson didn't just expose corruption, he's forcing us to re-examine the very foundation of military-civilian relations." The ripple effects of that cold December night continued to spread, touching lives far beyond the quiet stretch of Highway 95 where it all began. The truth about why General Thompson was on Highway 95 that night emerged through a series of carefully orchestrated revelations. His scheduled flight to Washington had been deliberately missed. The unmarked car, the specific route, even the slight speeding, all had been calculated to ensure he would encounter Officer Parker at precisely the right moment. Earlier that day, Thompson had received an encrypted message warning him that the corruption network had discovered his investigation. His office had been quietly searched, his home security system remotely accessed. The conspirators had planned to silence him using a tragic accident during his scheduled flight to Washington. The general, always 3 steps ahead, had seen it coming. A retired intelligence officer, speaking on condition of anonymity, revealed that Thompson had spent months preparing alternate routes and contingency plans. The highway route wasn't just an escape path, it was part of an elaborate strategy to ensure the evidence would reach multiple agencies simultaneously, preventing any single corrupt official from burying it. The briefcase Thompson carried contained more than just documents. Hidden in its lining was a sophisticated data package, names, dates, account numbers, and most crucially, a complete map of the corruption network's digital infrastructure. The tracking device inside wasn't meant to locate the briefcase, it was broadcasting decoy signals to mislead those trying to intercept it. The investigation revealed that Thompson had chosen that specific stretch of highway for its unique combination of features, multiple traffic cameras, clear sight lines, and most importantly, its location within Officer Parker's patrol route. Thompson had studied Parker's background extensively, identifying him as someone with both the integrity and the personal motivation to handle the situation properly. What appeared to be random civilian vehicles passing during the traffic stop were actually carrying members of an independent oversight team Thompson had quietly assembled. Each person had been carefully chosen for their incorruptibility, given specific pieces of evidence, and positioned to ensure the full story would emerge even if Thompson himself was silenced. Linda Thompson's composed public appearances masked her active role in the operation. She had been instrumental in establishing a network of military spouses who documented suspicious contractor activities on bases across the country. Her women's support group meetings had doubled as secure information sharing sessions, building a comprehensive picture of the corruption's impact on military families. The general's personal driver of 15 years finally broke his silence, revealing that Thompson had spent countless nights secretly meeting with families of soldiers killed or injured by faulty equipment. Each story had strengthened his resolve to expose the truth, regardless of the personal cost. The driver described Thompson's growing anger as he uncovered more evidence of how procurement fraud had directly impacted troops on the ground. Most revealing was the discovery of Thompson's private journal, found in a safety deposit box opened by his wife. Its pages detailed his growing moral conflict, the struggle between military loyalty and his duty to protect his soldiers. The final entry, written the morning of the traffic stop, read, "Some will call this betrayal. But the real betrayal would be staying silent while our people die from others' greed." As federal investigators pieced together Thompson's movements in the days leading up to the traffic stop, they uncovered a masterpiece of strategic planning. Every detail, from the weather conditions to the timing of shift changes at security checkpoints, had been factored into his plan. The traffic stop wasn't just an encounter, it was the culmination of years of preparation, executed with the precision of a military operation. 6 months after the fateful traffic stop, General Robert Thompson emerged from protective custody to testify before a closed Senate committee. His testimony led to the immediate arrest of 32 high-ranking officials and civilian contractors. The ripple effects transformed both military procurement and police oversight procedures across the nation. The reforms that followed became known as the Thompson Protocols, a comprehensive set of guidelines ensuring transparency in military contracts and establishing clear channels for reporting suspicious activities. The new system emphasized protection for whistleblowers and created independent oversight committees staffed by both military and civilian experts. Officer James Parker, promoted to lead a new joint military police liaison unit, developed training programs teaching law enforcement officers how to recognize and respond to corruption indicators. His father's story became part of the curriculum, highlighting the human cost of systemic failures and the importance of moral courage in both military and police service. Linda Thompson transformed her military family support network into a powerful advocacy organization. The group's efforts led to the creation of the Military Family Protection Act, ensuring that service members' families would have direct channels to report concerns about equipment, training, or support services without fear of retaliation. The truck driver who captured the viral video, now revealed as a retired master sergeant, used his unexpected platform to establish a veterans watchdog group. Their investigations into military contracts and veterans services became a trusted source of accountability, ensuring that the reforms wouldn't fade with time. General Thompson declined reinstatement to his former position, choosing instead to work with military academies to develop ethics programs. His lectures on moral leadership and the duty to speak truth to power became mandatory training for officers across all service branches. The highest form of loyalty, he would tell cadets, is to the truth and to those who serve. The evidence from Thompson's briefcase led to the recovery of over $4.2 billion in fraudulent contracts. This money was redirected to improve military equipment, veterans' healthcare, and family support services. The first new body armor produced under the reformed procurement system carried a small stamp, TP Standard, Thompson Protocol Standard. Officer Parker and General Thompson maintained a quiet friendship, meeting annually at a small diner near Highway 95. Their conversations typically focused not on the past but on the ongoing work of maintaining the reforms they had helped create. Their unlikely partnership became a symbol of how military and law enforcement communities could work together to serve the greater good. As Thompson stood on stage at the Military Ethics Institute's opening ceremony, he reflected on how a single traffic stop had catalyzed such profound change. Sometimes, he told the audience, the most important battles we fight are not against external enemies, but against corruption within our own ranks. True patriotism isn't blind loyalty, it's having the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it comes at a personal cost. The legacy of that December night continues to influence new generations of military and law enforcement officers. In police academies and military training centers across the country, cadets learn that real heroes aren't defined by their rank or status, but by their willingness to risk everything to protect those they serve. The Thompson Protocols remain a testament to the power of one person's moral courage to create lasting change, and a reminder that the greatest acts of service sometimes require challenging the very institutions we've sworn to protect.